Ladies and gentlemen, konnichiwa, and welcome to this Kamen review that has taken forever. My name is, of course, Guy, the Kamen Gentleman, and it seems like this review series has a curse on it already, where videos take way too long. Today's video is going to be about the wonderful Wartales developed by Shiro Games, one of my favorite games of all time, and I sort of tried to break this video down a little bit more and talk about all the points. We're sort of, again, we're early on in this series, so the review idea is changing from video to video to see how comfortable it is for me to make. Future videos will be coming out very soon. I just want to point that out. Really, a lot of stuff is going on, and I might do a video about it later on. But anyway, enough about that. Enough about me. You're here for Wartales. Enjoy. Now, I want to continue the full transparency as we go through this review. I freaking adore Wartales. Squad-based management games that use turn-based strategy elements exist within the building blocks of who I am as a gamer. Way back in the early 90s when we had Amigas and floppy disks and all the crazy 90s stuff that we had, I grew up on the likes of UFO Defense, Terror from the Deep, those two wonderful XCOM games that were brutally hard at times. Hero Quest, which still baffles me that it's also a video game as well as a board game. It's weird. And Space Crusade, which kind of got me hooked on 40k as well, which is a nice thing. So those games and subsequently Fire Emblem, when I finally got to play that, really defined who I am as a gamer. So imagine my surprise back in 2021 as I was scrolling through Steam, Wartales pops up, and watching the footage and reading the store page and the blurbs and stuff, I fell in love with this game and instantly bought it. And now 2021 was early access days for Wartales, so I was making a risk with buying it back then, but I can happily state that 3 years later or so, this game was worth buying. So what is the premise of Wartales? What is it all about? Well, to put it simply, you are a band of mercenaries attempting to eke out a life in a world that is dealing with its own issues at the time, and how you go about your time in the world is entirely up to you. Will you be a defender of the people, battling brigands and bandits, besieging merchants, pursuing daring escaped prisoners for fame and coin? Do you seek treasure and relics in the depths of tombs? Do you take up that mercantile lifestyle, moving between towns, buying and selling? Or perhaps subterfuge and crime is more to your taste. The choice is up to you. For the majority of this review, we will be looking at the base Wartales game. However, I will be mentioning aspects of the two DLCs that are currently out, Pirates of Belleron and The Tavern Opens. And at the end of the video, we'll cover them very briefly, as at the time of scripting and recording this video, I haven't really delved into the Pirates of Belleron DLC, but I want to make sure it's represented in this video along with the Tavern Opens DLC. While at first glance the gameplay looks akin to medieval XCOM, which admittedly is something I want now, but where XCOM is more about reacting to invasions and building a base, Wartales is focused on offering the player ways to live out that mercenary lifestyle. But before we can explore these ways and the game proper, we need to start at the very beginning of the game with the three most important choices you have to make. These three choices are multiple choice questions that focus on a single aspect of your mercenary company, while having a thematic description with each option in the three questions. Starting with their background. This is the most important question of the three, as it determines the starting equipment, composition of the 4 starting members of your company, as well as a path-specific quest that is only visible when we examine the path screen in the game proper. And while most of these backgrounds are freely selectable, it is important to note that the last 2 backstories are themed around the 2 DLCs. For example, the Shipwrecked Pirate Crew one has the Pugilist class, which came out around the first DLC's release, and is themed around the pirates. And the second one is focusing on setting up a tavern. Once you've selected your company's backstory, we move on to what their strengths are. This is in essence the company-wide buff and will cover different traits such as reducing movement fatigue, sales price increases, critical damage increases, experience gain during combat, and influence gain after combat. Following this question, we get the company-wide debuff. These will cover areas like less carry weight, reduced critical hit chances, increased danger during rests, and so on. Thankfully, most of these debuffs can be negated by traits and upgrades later in the game, so don't worry too much about the choice you make here. Once you've completed the 3 questions and essentially fleshed out your company's backstory, you then get the option to choose the difficulty settings in the game, starting with Exploration. As you'll be spending the majority of your time fighting and exploring, your choice here will determine how the world around you reacts to your growth. These choices are Adaptive and Region Lock. Adaptive exploration will constantly scale combat encounters depending on the size of your mercenary band, equipment, and conditions. Region Lock will have set difficulties in each region within the game, making it so that if you leave your starting region too early, you will be up against some well-equipped and dangerous foes. Following that option, you have other options to further customize the difficulty of combat, survival, and your ability to save the game. The latter being the easiest to explain, as you can either have limited saving, where it is mainly autosaves when you enter a city, a town, start combat, and so on. Free saving allows you to save anywhere in the world as many times as you want, and Iron Man locks you into a single save, so it is the hardest difficulty basically. For the combat difficulty, this determines how punishing battles will be in the game and how much planning and preparation will be needed before you jump into each fight. For survival, this covers all of the simulation settings within the game, covering how often your company will need paying, how their moods are, how easy or hard it is to keep them happy and in your company. For those 2 settings, we have 4 options to choose from, ranging from novice to extreme, the latter coming with specific rules for that difficulty. For extreme combat, for example, death is instantaneous. You go down to 0 hit points, you are dead. Retreats will have higher penalties to your team's morale, and when companions decide to flee, they are gone as well. These difficulty options are freely changeable throughout the game, so if combat becomes too intense or too easy, you can freely alter it to fit your style. After going through the multiple choice questions and customizing your preferred difficulty, you will now have the chance to customize the members of your mercenary company. Each of your mercenaries will start with 2 skills, a weapon skill and a support skill, also known as utility. Weapon skills will be linked to the weapon your mercenary currently has equipped, and utility skills are something that all mercenaries can use, but at the start of the game they will only have one of these skills available to them that you get to select during customization. Some of these skills allow you to deal damage after a certain percentage of health loss has been dealt to an enemy unit. Others will allow you to disengage and move away from combat, while another will actually allow you to taunt an enemy, keeping them close to you. Others will heal adjacent allies, which is very important to stop them from dying during combat, unless you're playing on Extreme. As for the ranged class in the game, an aim skill is there, allowing you to increase the range of your attack as well as the percentage to hit the target. As you explore the world, you will find Brotherhood training camps. These places will allow you to learn new utility skills, as well as changing around your party's abilities. The last addition to the unit customization is being able to select traits. When you actually start customization for your units, they will just have a random trait. If you select a trait from the drop-down menu, another positive trait will come up, allowing you to have 2 positives, but then the third trait that comes up will be a negative trait. This allows you to be a little bit more careful with your customization. However, for my playthroughs, I always have them as random because I like that little bit of risk. Because you will spend the majority of your time roaming the world, living out your preferred lifestyle when you're not in combat, Wartales is a management game at heart. You will have to remain aware of your band's happiness, hunger, wages, and the relationships between members of your party. Most of these can easily be seen through the main UI screen and will be managed through the correct systems, which we'll look at in a bit. But for now, let's talk about the class structure of the mercenaries that you have in your party and those you will be able to hire later on. The majority of the classes that you will see are melee based. spearmen, swordsmen, brutes, warriors, rangers, and pugilists. And as mentioned in the previous section, the ranged class, the archer. Having a varied mix of classes within your band is the key to success within Wartales, as each one offers different skills and traits that can turn the tide of battle very quickly. Swordsmen, brutes, and warriors also have the option to wield two-handed weapons, which changes up their weapon skills again. So keeping that information in mind is very important when considering tactical advantages, disadvantages, and party composition, as you don't want to lean more towards a single style, as it will leave your party open to the opposite style. As you get more skirmishes under your belt, your mercenaries will gain experience from these battles, allowing them to level in their respective class. Upon each level, 3 attributes will be randomly selected for you to assign a single point into one of these 3. However, one of the 3 that are selected will actually gain 2 points instead of 1. These selected attributes will be identified by a gold plus icon next to them. A single point attribute increase will have a single plus next to it, whereas a 2-point increase will have 2 pluses. The attributes that you will be looking at and dealing with throughout the game are strength, dexterity, constitution, willpower, critical hit, and movement. Warriors, brutes, spearmen, and swordsmen will favor the strength attribute, as their skills will increase in damage as you increase this attribute. Archers, pugilists, and rangers will favor dexterity. Constitution covers a mercenary's health and carrying capacity. Willpower covers their morale, critical hit chances, and at set numbers like 15 willpower, allows a mercenary to survive a normally killing blow 1 time during combat. The critical hit attribute covers both the percentages of critical hit chance as well as bonus damage when you actually land the critical hit. And finally, movement will cover how many tiles your mercenaries can move in combat. At specific levels determined by each class, mercenaries can select a single specialization skill that can help change their effectiveness within battle. Most of these will be passive abilities. However, at either 2nd level or 3rd level, each class has access to 3 subclasses. For example, the warrior class has access at level 2 to berserker, executioner, or sentinel. Now, not only do these subclasses grant stat increases, but also they allow for the mercenary to wear different types of armor, for example, light armor, medium armor, or heavy armor. This allows them to change up their effectiveness even further with stronger defenses, and grants them a new combat skill or utility skill. These new abilities will require the use of valor points to use, something which we'll look at properly in the combat section. And at level 12, you will get to select between a bravery skill, which is a powerful special skill that has specific rules to them, mainly that each mercenary with a bravery skill can use it once per combat. Meaning that if you have multiple people in your party with a bravery skill, once per round, one of them can use their bravery skill, or they can select a class specialization. This will allow them to unlock another skill from a previous tier. Beyond combat-focused abilities and classes, your mercenaries will have the option to enter different professions that grant the mercenary different bonuses to their stats, while also opening up potential crafting options. The professions that you will gain access to are as follows: miner, brewer, woodcutter, bard, scholar, angler, tinkerer, cook, thief, alchemist, and blacksmith. These professions fall into 3 subcategories: gathering, crafting, and miscellaneous. Miner, woodcutter, angler, and thief all fall within the gathering category. Brewer, tinkerer, cook, alchemist, and blacksmith fall into the crafting, and bard and scholar will fall into the miscellaneous. The only reason why I place them there personally is because the bard's effectiveness is focused only in taverns and tombs. The bard's mechanic is actually kind of fun and simple to use, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And the scholar works more in a passive way compared to most of the others. Gathering professions find their usefulness on the world map with glowing points of interest, as well as certain locations like woodblocks, iron veins, and fishing spots. For crafting professions, they can only be accessed through specific places. The tinkerer, brewer, and cook can only use their crafting objects on the camp screen, whereas the blacksmith will require a forge, alchemists will require a herbalist store. As for where the scholar is useful, they can use a lectern within the camp to research minor relics found through the tombs, as well as occasional gathering spots that show up in the camp. At the start of the game, most of these professions will be hidden, but once you come across one of these interactable locations, the profession will be unlocked for you to assign to a mercenary. And lastly, those scholars who are interacting with a lectern can gain knowledge on every night. Knowledge is the game's research currency. Crafting new items, discovering locations, will also grant different amounts of knowledge. When the set amount is reached that you can see at the top left corner of the UI, you will actually gain a knowledge point. These knowledge points can be used to unlock passive skills that will affect the entire company, such as the ability to sprint in the world map, consume less food, or make recruiting new mercenaries cheaper. As well as these passive skills, knowledge points can go into learning new recipes for the crafting professions, as well as passive skills for the ship that you can get through the Pirates DLC. Let's quickly talk about the abilities of some of these professions, shall we? Well, actually all of the professions, but some of them in turn. Professions like the tinkerer, the alchemist, and the cook will actually complete their abilities straight away. So, for example, if you want to make food and you have the materials ready, the cook, when selected, will allow you to select the recipe you want to make, the amount you want to make of it, and when you click cook, it is done. You also have a percentage of making better quality meals as you level up in that skill. The brewer, however, requires a brewing keg in your camp, and when assigned to it, you can actually select the type of alcohol you are going to brew, and after a night cycle, that is completed. The scholar, however, actually has two abilities that play out. The first one is researching and discovering relics. These are items that you come across throughout the world, and they're generally like fragments of a relic, and the scholar will take a couple of nights to piece them back together to make a relic item. But also, you will come across codexes throughout the game that need to be unlocked, which is something the scholar can do when assigned to a lectern. These codexes have a weird unlocking mechanic that requires you to place 3 different runes onto it, and if you select 3 of the wrong ones, but one of them is right, there will be a sign that basically points to you going, hey, one of these is correct. And once you've got all 3 done, then you need to unlock the knowledge of what those runes mean. But for the rest of the professions, these come with more active minigames that will impact the outcome of either the gathering or the crafting. For the miner and woodcutter, they use the same timing mechanic, where you will need to stop the line when it turns green within a circle that grows smaller after each successful stop. The angler requires you to keep the line within the middle of the bar for a length of time, very similar to the Stardew Valley fishing mechanic. For the thief, it uses a lockpicking mechanic very similar to most RPGs' lockpicking mechanics, like Skyrim's, for example. The bard, as mentioned earlier, has a Guitar Hero-like rhythm game, which is kind of fun but also very difficult to do if you're like me and bad at timing. And finally, the blacksmith requires you to hit pieces of armor at the right time, shown by the color and the glowing spark that appears on each piece. Successfully hitting all 4 pieces on the anvil at the right time will actually increase the chance of having better quality armor and weapons. As I mentioned the camp screen, let's take a look at that now, shall we? And how the camp works within the game. As I said earlier within this review, beyond the strategy elements that Wartales favors, one of the main gameplay loops is managing your mercenary company, and as you traverse the world map, at the top of the screen you will see the fatigue bar. This starts full at 0% and will reduce down to 100 as you explore the world. When it reaches 100%, your party will slow down and gain the exhausted debuff, meaning if this happens close to hostiles, you are going to be at a serious disadvantage. Thankfully, the game helpfully highlights the need for you to rest your party by flashing the camp icon over the head of your party on the world map. Clicking on the camp icon will take you to the camp screen. This will serve as the hub of all your main interactions that you will want to focus on within the game. At the start of the game, all you will have on this screen is a campfire, your 4 mercenaries, your pony, and a tinkerer's table. While on this screen, you can assign your mercenaries to different tasks by moving them to a tile next to the object you wish to assign them to. Their animation will change, showing that they have been assigned to it before you let go. Hovering over the objects within your camp will also give you a breakdown of what each one does and what will happen if you assign someone to it. The campfire, for example, grants an additional point of happiness for each mercenary that is assigned to it, up to a maximum of 4 mercenaries. The tinkerer's table, however, will require a tinkerer assigned to it, and on every night cycle, that tinkerer will create a set of raw materials that are very useful to your survival throughout the game, as they act as repair tools and components within some crafting recipes. I should also highlight that using and assigning are 2 very different options here on this screen. Using allows you to make use of that object's purpose. So, for a tinkerer's table, when used, allows you to create items like fishhooks, lockpicks, torches, saddlebags, as well as other objects for you to place within your camp, like a cooking pot. You will need to select the mercenary with the profession to use these objects, even if they are assigned to them on the screen. The only real exception early on is the campfire. While you will have people assigned to it, no one will need to be selected in order to use it. And the campfire is where you will feed and pay your party. When it comes to feeding your troops, there will be a max number of food that you need to hit, very similar to how the Baldur's Gate 3 camping mechanic works. Every food and drink item within the game has a set value for how much food it will grant. The number of units within your party, plus any negative traits, will affect how much food you will have to assign, along with any beasts or prisoners that you have in your camp. The other thing to be aware of are traits that govern a mercenary's taste in food and drink, as you will come across those who will only eat meat or vegetable, or they will have to consume alcohol to be happy. If you ignore these needs, they will also grow dissatisfied with your party. Every couple of days, a prompt will appear when traveling that states, during today's rest, your company will need paying, as well as the amount of crowns that they require. Crowns are the currency within Wartales, and we'll discuss how to get them during the combat section. But for now, the common way to gain crowns is through selling trinkets, supplies, and gear, as well as winning fights. When it is payday, you have the option to either pay your party or not. If you do pay your party, they will gain a boost in happiness as well as experience. But if crowns are tight and you aren't close to a town, you can delay payments, but understand that doing so comes at a risk of their happiness. So, what is happiness within this game? Well, to put it simply, happiness is the team's morale outside of combat and can be affected by the choices that you make throughout the game. With the right traits, feeding and paying on time, as well as the use of alcohol, it can be very easy to maintain a positive happiness. But if you find yourself in the red, there are negative outcomes that will happen. There are 3 different stages for happiness. -10, which is in the red, will push the risk of your mercenaries leaving because they're dissatisfied. A happiness of 7 will increase your valor points by 2, and a happiness rank of 15 will increase combat experience by 20%, and any increase beyond the maximum of 15 will grant you 6 influence points per point of happiness over that max number of 15. Back in the early days of the game's development, there was very little else to do within the camp screen. However, there is now a conversation system that has a chance to happen after every rest. This will be shown by a little question mark box above the head of the mercenary that wants to talk to you. You can either start the conversation yourself by clicking on that mercenary, or when you exit the camp screen, that conversation will start itself. On this screen, you will hear the thoughts, boastings, or grievances of that particular merc, and you will have a choice of 3 responses. Hovering over each one will show you the results, what resources you have to use for good or for bad. Some examples of this system are as follows. If you don't capture escaped prisoners early on in the game, one of your mercenaries might bring it to your attention as they admonish you for not doing that. Or if you manage to beat a champion foe or one of the ghost fights, one mercenary might want to celebrate that feat. These interactions, along with the relationship mechanic, help make your camp and party a living, breathing entity compared to just models on a screen. The relationship mechanic that I mentioned there works quietly behind the scenes and determines how your party interact with each other, and imparts bonuses and negatives to those interactions depending on how good or bad these relationships are. The biggest factor in changing how these relationships stand is within combat, as certain actions that you can do in combat will help improve the relationship between the 2 units in question. The other aspect of developing your troop is through the paths system that I mentioned earlier. Think of paths as more an in-depth achievement system. These paths focus on power and glory, which is your fighting, your warrior type, trade and craftsmanship, which is your mercantile, crime and chaos, subterfuge, and mysteries and wisdom, discovery. Each path gains experience through the use of path points, which are granted through completing themed challenges within each path, such as completing a number of missions, kill a number of enemies with backstabbing, and when a path levels up, you are granted to a talent point that you can use within that specific path's talent tree. And at certain levels, each path opens up new bonuses, like building travel posts, which are essentially your fast travel points between cities, and crafting lecterns, to name a few. Pausing for a second, mainly because here on the path screen is where you will find your quest from the backstory. These are generally themed around the backstory. So for example, the one from my main campaign, I actually have to defend merchants from attacks, with the number increasing every time I max it out. These quests actually grant an additional path point for you to use. In order to improve your company's strength, it is not all about the numbers of your company size. It is also about the quality of the weapons and armor they have equipped. Equipment in the game comes in the form of weapons, helmets, armors, belt accessories, and backup accessories. These can be mostly purchased from traveling equipment merchants that are identified by a coin bag next to a suit of armor on their icon in the world map, found after battles or crafted. When purchasing from merchants, they will often sell one weapon and one armor, mostly at a unusual rarity, with the occasional higher rarity found within these merchants. And for the armors that they sell, they will also represent a specific faction. This is generally a good way to quickly strengthen your company early on if you have the funds. When you have enough components and the respective recipes, you can actually start crafting weapons and armor. The crafting in this game works on tiers: apprentice, experienced, journeyman, and master, with each one needing specific level requirements to use the armor and weapons. While all of the weapons you can craft will have the basic weapon skill, they will actually have higher stat bonuses than most of the weapons you will have. Each tier requires a specific special component in order to make them. For the apprentice tier, you will simply need iron ore along with wood and leather. For the experienced tier, the addition of white leather instead of leather and coal. For journeyman, rime steel is needed instead of white leather, and for master, Arcadian steel is the key material. Admittedly, as I haven't reached the master tier yet, this is me speculating on the information that I have available to me. Alongside improving your blacksmithing skills through crafting, it is also recommended to improve your alchemy skills too, as the development of rhyme steel and Arcadian steel are done through the alchemy process, and working on alchemy allows you to create healing medicine to tend to wounds after battles, oils that can impose buffs to your unit's weapons, bombs which either deal damage, knock people back, or as in my favorite, unleash the bees! And through alchemy you can also make belt accessories too. All of these components can greatly improve your combat skills. Speaking of combat, let's finally unpack this big part of the content. Most of the time that you will be spending within Wartales will be engaging in combat. And thankfully, because of the various groups within the game, combat never feels samey. Because these groups, ranging from animals to bandits, escaped prisoners, different factions, contract targets, rat infestations, ghost fights, tomb fights, champion fights that all appear throughout the world, really make each combat counter unique. All of these groups can be identified by the respective icon that shows up above their heads, much like the merchants, and the diamond border around the icon changes color depending on the difficulty of the fight, grey being the easiest and red being the hardest. Most of the groups will always be moving around and will often engage with your party if you remain within their line of sight for long enough. If you unknowingly find yourself within their line of sight for too long, there will be a helpful audio cue that will trigger when they have aggroed to your party. It is possible to outrun the groups, or if they have unfortunately caught up with you, you can actually distract them if they're animals, or negotiate with them if they are human. These two options cost resources to do so, and will make them non-hostile until they have reset. For distractions, you will need animal carcasses that you collect when you've won battles with animals. For negotiations, crowns and influence will be needed. We have mentioned influence a few times before. This is another resource that you gain through winning fights, taking prisoners to jail, as well as certain social conversations. And as I said, this resource is used not only for negotiations, but also for recruiting new people to your party, increasing contract rewards once you have the trait unlocked, increasing attributes on levels up, again with the required unlock, and those social interactions I mentioned. Some of them actually require you to spend influence to gain that influence back. It's kind of a weird thing, but it's also very funny because you get like free stuff out of it. It is wise to avoid combat when needed. As mentioned earlier in the review, there is a fatigue system to be aware of. So if you get caught when you're exhausted, it is better to avoid the fight if you have the resources. Other cases where avoiding combat is recommended is if your party is injured and you don't have any healing potions, or their armor is broken and you have no raw materials to repair them. But if your party is at full strength, then battle is to be joined. When combat starts, the game transitions from the world map to a battle map, determined by the location combat started. So if you started combat in a village, the battle map will be a village. If there was a tower nearby, there will be a tower. That kind of fun stuff makes the battle maps more interesting and engaging. Each battle map will come with a number of traps, environmental dangers, and interactable objects. And at the start of the battle, you will have the option to maneuver your party around, assigning them to predetermined tiles on the battle map. One thing to note when doing this is the enemy units will actually turn depending on the unit you move, because they will aggro to the weakest or the strongest unit, depending on the type of enemy you are fighting. During this time, it is also a good decision to get a good overview of the terrain. Have a look around, find where the enemy units are placed, find where it is more strategic to place more powerful units, as well as taking a look at the combat UI. At the top of the screen is the morale bar. The morale bar is very important to keep an eye on throughout the combat. To the left side, it shows how many units you have in your party and how many you have control of. To the right is how many enemies are left. This bar will increase with the death of every enemy unit and decrease with the death of every friendly unit. When the bar reaches a set point, shown by a little line and a little icon underneath, your party will gain the galvanization buff, which increases the damage that you deal. Then, if the bar reaches the next point after the galvanization buff, you will have the option of letting the remaining enemy flee the battle. This will end the battle in victory, and those that fled disappear from the world map. This is a very useful option if the battle was incredibly difficult and you don't want to push your luck, especially if people are dying, because once battle is finished, they will not be dying. At the bottom of the screen is the rest of the information you will need to be aware of. The unit screen, which is in the exact middle at the bottom of the screen, shows the unit you have selected, their health in red, their armor in grey, their guard skill if they have one, any buffs or debuffs they might have, and their skills. If you right click on a skill that has an area of effect, you will actually gain a ghost image over your cursor of the area affected. This allows you to effectively move your unit into the most optimal location to damage more than one single enemy unit. To the bottom left of the screen is the combat order. This shows when a specific enemy, ally, or danger will trigger, as well as when your troop can act. But unlike foes and allies, any member of your troop can act whenever the blue icon shows on the tracker, apart from beasts, unless you have the required specialization unlocked for that. This is incredibly useful as it will allow you to tactically move and position your troop so you can perform combos on your targets. And finally, just above the unit screen is the valor points that you currently have. These are represented by orange diamonds. At the start of the game, you will have 7, with 2 more being added at a 7 happiness, as well as through traits, and certain specialization traits and abilities can also grant temporary valor points that will only last for the combat. These temporary ones are represented by yellow diamond. These points are used to perform class skills and utility skills. Every unit has a minimum of 2 actions that they can do each round. Move, which when selected shows the area that they can move in, dependent of their movement attribute, and attack, using either a weapon skill or a class skill or a utility skill if the prerequisites are hit. Once you have moved your chosen troop member next to or close to your target, you can trigger their combat or weapon skill. Most attacks in the game need you to be base to base with the enemy, but some that have area of attacks just have to be close enough to hit the target. When an enemy is being targeted by either a single attack or an area of effect attack, it is shown by a red targeting icon under the unit's model. It is also best to note that these area attacks can attack friendlies, which is something we'll talk about in a minute. Some skills require a round to activate or an enemy movement to trigger, much like the pikeman ability Spear Wall. Once you have dealt damage when base to base with the enemy, you will find that both units are now locked into combat with each other. Once engaged, the unit's movement icon becomes a disengage option, which allows you to break away from the fight while suffering an attack of opportunity from the enemy you are fleeing from. However, if your unit has the run utility skill or an attack skill that knocks enemies back or allows you to move and disengage while attacking, it is possible to avoid that attack of opportunity. The engage mechanic leaves it open for flanking or surrounding tactics to be used against those who are engaged, both enemies and allies. This can be incredibly useful for rangers who are designed to attack units from behind. Tactically engaging can dramatically change the course of battle. Having heavily armored units engage a target, then the lighter units with more damage converge on the target is a sound tactic. One of the other main uses of triggering this mechanic yourself is negating the effectiveness of archers, who often than not have weapon skills that come with pushback effects, and as most archers need to have space in order to use their abilities, once they are locked into an engagement, they have to fight hand to hand. One of the things I will quickly mention before we continue here is I originally called this mechanic the duel mechanic, but it turns out that is a mechanic in the Pirates of Belleron DLC, which of course I didn't really know about because I haven't explored that one yet, but we'll talk about that later on. As mentioned on the unit screen, units come with health and armor. The amount is determined by their constitution and the armor that they currently have equipped, with light offering the lowest armor score but also granting them better stats, and heavier granting the highest defense but slowing them down a lot. Another stat that is very important to be aware of is the guard stat, as mentioned earlier. This is granted by using a shield, and this stat significantly reduces damage dealt by its current percentage that reduces upon taking damage. However, it is possible to drop the guard stat to 0%, as some skills come with the destabilization debuff, which fully negates the stat for a round or two. So often than not, you will want to prioritize those enemies, especially as they tend to be some of the strongest in battle, before you engage them with more high damaging units. As most of the enemy types you'll be fighting are human enemies, they come with their own classes and appearances, themed around each class and their group, making it easier to identify them on the battle map. And selecting them, as well as non-human enemies, allows you to see their skills and what damage those skills do, as well as any bonuses that they might get. Beyond the different skill sets each human enemy has, they also come in 3 different flavors: regular, seasoned, and leader. For most groups that you encounter, the first 2 will be mixed up within the group. Seasoned enemies are noted by the little red star icon next to their name, but for specific targets, mainly from contract mission, leaders will come into play. Seasoned enemies sport increases in their strength, dexterity, and constitution by 20%, whereas leaders will grant a company-wide buff, either doubled movement, higher defenses, critical hit chances, that kind of thing. In the early days of game development, it was possible to negate this buff by engaging in combat with the leader, but now that leader has to be killed outright in order to disable the buff, and as they are much tougher to fight, it can result in a long battle ahead. It is also important to note that leaders and seasoned enemies cannot be captured by your units. Beyond simply slaughtering your foes, you will have the ability to capture regular humans as well as animals, as long as you have the shackles and or rope in your inventory, and units are not engaged in combat with a weakened enemy. The weakened enemy will need to be engaged with a single unit and have a non-engaged unit sneak up behind them in order to trigger that ability once their health has reached the requisite number. The percentage for capture will be much higher the lower the health value of the target is. On successful captures, these targets will be removed from the battle and will be added to your troop after the battle, adding additional food intake. Regarding the capture of animals, the captured animals will end up joining your troop as ally and will act on their own terms unless you have an archer with the Beast Mastery specialization trait at level 5, as we mentioned earlier. For human prisoners, they will require feeding, but they are useless in combat. But you have the ability to assign them to jobs within your camp, as some units will refuse to do certain tasks. But if you don't want them in your camp, in each region there will be a jail building that you can take your captured prisoners to and turn them over for coin. Also, one of the mechanics in the game is if they are not secure every night, there is a chance for them to escape. Now, beyond fighting random enemies on the overworld map, there are other types of combat that you can engage in: dungeon, ghost, rat infestation, and champion, as mentioned earlier. Starting with the latter, in each region of the game, there will be a single champion enemy that acts as the only real boss fight mechanic in the game that I'm aware of currently. They will have specific abilities and rule sets throughout the combat and can take multiple actions per round. Because of their increased stat line and skills, these will require a lot more planning and the use of applying multiple debuffs in order to take them down effectively without losing the majority of your party. Ghost fights are only achievable at night and are noticeable by fog showing up in specific areas in the overworld. Any NPC that enters this fog will die instantly. However, these fights are more of a battle of attrition than other battles that you will face in the game, mainly because the ghost animals will apply a terror debuff to the units that they hit. What the terror debuff does is once it is stacked to 5 on a unit, they will actually flee the battle. Thankfully, on lower difficulties, units that flee will actually remain in your company, but they will not be in the battle for the duration of that battle. On the first round of ghost fights, you will have a number of enemies to fight. If you are unable to kill them all before the round ends, more will spawn along with a nightmare. This creature acts as the leader of the ghost pack. If you are successful in defeating the pack and the nightmare, you will be rewarded with a large number of components, both common and uncommon and rare, that you can only gain from these specific fights, like the white leather, though the white leather can also be bought from certain vendors in the game as well. It is also important to note that for the majority of my time playing Wartales, ghost fights have been the bane of my life. They've been so difficult to deal with. However, for the footage that we are watching now, this is actually the first one I've ever won. I haven't tried any others since, but I'm very happy about that one. Rat infestations are specific locations on the world map. These fights act similar to ghost fights, as every round more enemies will show up to battle your troop. The goal of these fights is to defeat the brood mother, who remains in one place and every round will only summon more rats. Around the map there are areas of poison that contain plague growths. Destroying these growths will grant more components for alchemy if you destroy them before you beat the broodmother. Also, it is important to note that the rat infestations have a very similar debuff mechanic to the ghost fights, this being fever, and if you get enough stacks of fever there is a chance that your mercenary will get sick, so please do keep that in mind. Thankfully, rarely happens, at least for me at this point. Lastly, tombs or dungeon fights. These happen when you're exploring the tombs within each region. These are tough battles as the enemy number is actually unknown. While the enemy type is known, how many you will be facing is a mystery. The battle map itself is cloaked in darkness, which provides not only a difficult danger to face that needs most of your units to equip torches in advance. The enemy placements, unlike other maps, are actually concealed, so even if you move your units and your camera around the map, you will not be able to see the enemy location until they move within the light circle around each unit. The enemies you face here come with the Ambusher ability, which guarantees critical hits on a back attack, which can be brutal if you don't come prepared. Finally, as we wrap up this review, let's quickly talk about the DLC, which, at time of recording, are sat at a mixed rating on Steam, which, funnily enough, for all the games I like, a lot of the DLCs are mixed ratings, which is weird. We'll start with the Tavern Opens DLC, as I find that one to be the most involved in your day-to-day progression within Wartales. The concept is very simple. You get to run a tavern, with these taverns growing in size the further you delve into the game. So at certain points throughout your progression, a new tavern will open up. You get to hire people or assign members from your troop to work in the tavern, and wherever you start in the game, the first tavern that you get will be small and will only cost 1 crown. Once you prepare the tavern by placing down objects like tables, equipment, assigned enough staff like the tavern keeper, cooks, brewers, bards, bouncers, thieves, and created a menu of food, people will visit your tavern every day, and after resting for the night, you will see a shift summary of how well the day went. From time to time, it is wise to visit your tavern either by visiting the town it's placed in or by selecting the tavern icon in the camp screen, as it will allow you to see the changes that have happened in more detail, as well as seeing if there's any potential conversation events that are waiting for you. The currency that's used within the Tavern DLC is thankfully copper coins, so your crowns are safe from this. And when you have a steady intake of these coins, you can actually withdraw them and convert them into crowns, so you can keep your company well funded as long as your tavern is going well. As you progress through the regions, like I said, you will have that opportunity to move your tavern to that region, providing a larger tavern for more equipment and tables and stuff to be added, as well as more patrons coming in. Thankfully, you don't have to reassign anyone when you transition the tavern from one region to the next. For the Pirates DLC, this allows you to take command of a ship and sail around a new expansive region full of mystery and deadly dangers. This is the DLC, like I mentioned at the beginning, that I haven't really delved into beyond simply getting the ship, sailing around and seeing how the mechanics work. Because you're actually on the ocean, you do have to deal with wind direction, which will fill the sails of your ship and help you move faster or slower depending on the direction you are going. Combat on ships actually comes with some fun mechanics, like using ballistas to attack enemies within a straight line, as well as using rigging to swing across and land in the middle of fights. Because you're fighting on ships, there is actually boundaries to be aware of, because if an enemy or your unit is knocked beyond this boundary, they will actually fall and cling to the side of the ship, and you have the option, if it is a friendly, to help them up, or an enemy to actually stomp on their hands to have them fall into the ocean and be removed from combat. Having this new region to explore and a ship to maintain and upgrade is actually really cool, I think, and adds a new element to the Wartales experience. Lastly, Shiro Games have shown on their roadmap that in August we will be getting a third DLC known as the Pits, which brings in new challenging enemies, interactive battle maps with unique designs, along with new items and rewards. This is followed by another free content update in October, adding a new place of interest, a new champion to fight, drop in and out of co-op, which is the multiplayer aspect I've never really explored, so I didn't really want to put it in the review, but there is that option there, as well as balancing changes and more. And also in the fourth quarter of this year, there is another DLC coming out, which is kind of exciting to see. And that's it, folks. We're at the end of the video. We're at the end of the review. If you got to this point, if you stuck with this video, thank you so much. I know I'm not that consistent with video updates and releases and stuff like that. It's a lot of hard work for me to actually get these videos done because of a lot of stuff. But thank you so much if you have gotten to this point, and I hope that you've got an interest in Wartales now. I absolutely love this game, and I really hope that you get to see that through this video. I know originally I said that my second Kamen review would actually be Kamen. That is still coming. I just need to finish the script for that because I literally started playing Wartales again. I'm like, you know what? I'm doing the video for this first. And here we are, a couple months down the line. Thankfully, the Kamen one shouldn't be another like 4 or 5 months before I release it, because boy howdy do I have worse timing for that ever, because the moment I start working I get sick. But I hope, like I said, I hope you enjoyed it. I will be trying to get back into more content stuff as we go along. I am currently playing the Shadows of the Erdtree DLC, so I will be working on a video for that when I finish it, which might be a while because it's taking time on that. And I have to play it a certain way, and that mod needs updates a lot. So that will be in the future. I apologize that it's not like cashing in on the mainstream times and stuff like that, but that's never me, really. I will be coming back to streaming very soon. I don't know if it'll be here on YouTube or Twitch or both, but I do want to get back into streaming, and I might stream more Wartales along with other games. So we shall see. But anyway, that's me done. I'm going to stop rambling. Thank you so much for watching, folks, and listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and I shall see you guys soon for the Kamen video and whatever else comes out. Maybe a Kamen Rider review coming soon, maybe. We shall see. Until then, folks, I've been Guy, the Kamen Gentleman. Thank you so much, and I shall see you guys very soon. Take care, and bye for now.